in order to graph an angle, we're going to begin from the positive x-axis, which is over here, and we're going to rotate counterclockwise in this direction if our angle is positive, and we're going to rotate clockwise if our angle is negative, which seems kind of backwards, but if you think about the way quadrants are numbered, they begin in the first quadrant over here and then rotate counterclockwise around in that direction. So that's why we move in a counterclockwise direction. So let's go ahead and actually, before we start this, let's identify the quadrant angles that we'd have to kind of help us figure out where these angles are going to be located. So 0 degrees is going to be down here, 90 degrees would be up top. If I get halfway around, I've gone 180 degrees. If I get down to the bottom of this, I've gone 270 degrees, and of course 360 would get me back to the beginning. So let's kind of use that as a reference to help figure out what quadrant these angles are located in. I'm going to do these all on the same graph and then erase. You guys may want to use different graphs or at least different colors, otherwise this gets really messy. So let's just kind of go through these in order. So 240 degrees, well, I can see that 240 is positive, so that tells me to rotate counterclockwise in this direction. I've got to go past 180. However, I don't want to get quite down to 270 because that would be too far. So what I'm going to do is I'm somewhere in the third quadrant. So I don't need a protractor. I'm not going to do this exactly. I'm just going to draw a ray in that quadrant starting from the origin. And I'm going to label or draw my angle and include an arrow on that to tell me that which direction I rotated in. And then what I like to do is also label it out here. So label that as 240 degrees. So that's kind of my sketch of that angle. I can see that angle ends up in quadrant 3. They asked me to identify that. Okay, so let me go ahead and erase this and let's try another one. Although if you want to pause the video and try these on your own, that's probably a great idea. Next up is 500 degrees. Well, 500 is over 360. So what that tells me is I've done a full rotation, and then I want to know how much further have I gone. So let's take 500 and subtract off the 360 for a full revolution. What that tells me is that I've still gone 140 degrees past where I began. So I'm going to go a full rotation around. I'm going to get past 90, but not get all the way to 180 again. So I'm somewhere in quadrant 2. So again, I don't need this to be super accurate. All I want to do is when I draw this swirl in there, I want to make sure that I include an arrow so I know which way I rotated. So 500 degrees is going to end up in quadrant 2. Okay, getting the hang of it. Again, let me go ahead and erase. If you guys want to do this on the same graph, you'll probably want to use different colors. Otherwise, you're seeing probably already how this gets messy. Next up is a negative angle. This time, I'm not beginning in any place different. I'm still beginning in the positive x-axis. However, the negative tells me I'm rotating clockwise this time. And so let me go ahead and throw my negative angles on here. This bottom angle will now be negative 90. This angle to the left will be negative 180 degrees. This top angle would be negative 270 degrees, and then I'd end up back at negative 360 to get me back to the beginning. Okay, so negative 50 is going to mean I don't quite even get to negative 90, so I'm somewhere in here. I don't need to be more accurate than that. Just go ahead and draw the rotation arrow so I can see which way you started and which way you rotated. So there's negative 50 degrees in quadrant 4. Okay, next up is 1080. Surfers, or not surfers, but skateboarders or snowboarders, that's what I'm thinking, may be familiar with some of these angles. 1080 is a perfect revolution. It's actually 3 revolutions. And one way I could find out how many times that was if I'm not a skateboarder is I could just divide this. Take 1080, 1080, divide that by 360. It turns out that that's equal to 3 full revolutions. So I'm actually going to end up right back where I started, which means I don't really have anything to graph other than a line right here. But again, I still want to see that swirl. So I've done 1 revolution, counterclockwise, 2 revolutions, and then a 3rd revolution. So I start to get a little bit dizzy. So that's what that graph of a 1080 degree angle would look like. As far as which quadrant it's in, it's not in any quadrant. It's right there on the axis. It's on the x-axis. Okay, and then our final one, negative 190 degrees. Again, that negative is telling me to rotate backwards. I'm still starting from the positive x-axis. I'm just rotating backwards this time in the clockwise direction. So that would get me to negative 180. I want to go a little bit past that. So that's the ray that I'll draw. That's what the angle would look like. I do want to make sure that I include this rotation arrow so I know which way I rotated to get to negative 190 degrees, which is in quadrant 2.